Hi, I'm B-Boy Bill, and this is the One Saw Layens frame jig. Well, before we get started, I just want to thank you guys for the welcome back messages. It has been a while since I got a video out, so I appreciate that, and thanks for stopping back to see what I'm up to. Well, just to recap from last week, the reason why I built this One Saw frame jig was because when I put out the videos on how to build a beehive and how to build a bee frame, there's a lot of people out there without all the tools that I have, and I'm fortunate enough to have some tools I've collected over the years. But I know a lot of people working out of their apartments or tiny homes, and they only have a circular saw and a small space to work. So we decided that it would be good to build a jig. If you haven't saw the video last week, check it out. I'll try to put one of those things here somewhere where you can click on it and see this baby in operation. But the whole idea behind it is that you can build a whole Layens frame with just one saw using this jig. Before we get started on this, I just want to say this is a big project. There's a lot of measurements, a lot of little intricate things going on. So I actually wrote a build guide how to do this. The book has over 30 diagrams and technical drawings, shopping lists, parts list, everything you need to get this done in a step-by-step. And I'll try to, I'll put it up here so you guys can just get a quick preview of it. But just so you know, if you're having trouble with the video and you're serious about building one of these, or you just want to support the channel, head on over to the website and you can purchase these plans on there. Well, as you guys may have heard, they don't call me Safe Boy Bill. So check out this disclaimer, see what not to do, and then we'll get started. All right, now that everybody knows what not to do, let's get to work. First thing we need to do is figure out the distance from the edge of our shoe to the blade. So to do that, just take some scrap wood, throw it together, and make yourself a nice little cut down the center like that, and that'll give you everything you need to know to figure out the exact distance. And I marked mine right on here. Mine is 1 3/8 of an inch. That's how far it is from this outside to this side of the blade. It's also important to know how wide your blade is. So if you don't know that it's 1/8 inch thick, then go ahead and measure the groove in the scrap wood that you just cut and make sure that you have a 1 inch thick blade. It's just going to work out for all the measurements. You can alter the measurements a little bit, but I would just say go get yourself a 1/8 inch blade. If for some reason you have a narrower blade for this project, it'll make all the rest of these numbers a lot easier for you. All right, now that you know how far that blade is away from your shoe and how wide your blade is on your circular saw, you can move on to the next step, which is ripping all the plywood. Now that number is going to come in real important when you rip this top piece to your rip fence. It's going to determine the width of the top piece of our rip fence. Now, see the top piece of the rip fence is a little bit narrower than the other two pieces of the rip fence, and that's because this is where that shoe rides along. So that number is how we get this. And I'll put the formula up there for how we get that number, and then you'll know how wide to cut this piece. It may be different on the saw you're using, so make sure you run the numbers on your saw, but mine is 2 13/16 inches, and that's what I made this top piece. As far as the plans go, this is item 2.4, rip fence C on the plans if you're following along. That's the only number that you have to calculate for yourself. I promise the rest of the numbers are given for you. So a little bit of math and we'll get on with it. All right, starting out, you're going to want a 36 inch by 22.5 by 3/4 inch piece of plywood. All our cuts here are going to be in the 22.5 direction, and the first thing we're going to do is get our base done. So you can go ahead and rip the base to 22.5 by 12. Well, now that the base is done, we can move on to the rip fence. And the rip fence is 22.5 inches long by 3.5 inches wide. We already talked about the width of this top board here. This is contingent upon your particular saw and how far the blade is away from the shoe. You can see the bottom board here has this groove here. Ignore this groove. We'll get to that later because I accidentally put that there. But this groove here, it's 1.25 inches from the top. And then you're going to leave space here for about a 1.5 inch piece of stock. So just a little over that, like 1 7/8 inches will get you by. And then you want to make this the rest of the length for your rip fence. We'll glue it, screw it together, and that'll be done. Well, now that you got your rip fence built, you can go ahead and build the pin assembly. The pin assembly is made from a 1/4 inch dowel and a 1 inch dowel. The 1/4 inch dowel is 3 5/8 inches long, and the 1 inch dowel is 5/8 inches long. And this will get you through the rip fence and right into the jig bottom. And there you have it. Now don't put the holes in your rip fence for the pins yet. That part's coming soon. Next up, we're going to put our guide fence together. If you made it through the rip fence, this is going to be super easy. Basically, you're starting out with the same dimensions, 22.5 inches long, 3.5 inches wide. You're leaving that groove down there in the bottom so you can get a 1.5 inch piece of stock in there. And we're just going to glue this together and screw it together like this. Just so you guys know, I'm only using 3 different size screws on this one, and the majority of the screws are either 2 inches or 1 1/4 inch drywall screws. There is some 8x1s, and they're not going to come into play until the end unit. You'll see those. They're stainless steel because that's all I had, but just about any type of woodworking screw will work for the end assembly unit when we get to that. All right, guys, this is the money here. We need to figure out exactly where to put this rip fence in, and we're going to do that by clamping it to the board, and we're going to put a couple holes, drill a couple holes in. I got mine about 4 inches for the end for the pin assembly, but get it clamped to the board. Make sure it's flush with the outside. Get yourself a framing square and make sure it is perpendicular to the side you're starting with, and get a line drawn along there. Once you get that first line drawn along there, the holes are drilled in, you can actually use the rip fence as a guide for the other holes. So that's what you want to do first. We're going to go ahead and make some more lines for each position of the rip fence. Now, starting with that line is your base line. The next line over is going to be 7/16 of an inch. Then the next line over is 7/8 of an inch. And the third line over is 1 11/16 of an inch. Those are all from the rip fence. That's how far you want to draw your lines. Use a framing square, get those nice and straight, because that is what you're going to be working off of. Now basically you want to move the rip fence over to each line, drilling your holes using the rip fence holes you already drilled as a guide, and putting those holes into your frame jig. This will be the different positions that you're going to cut your stock with. Well, if you got the rib fence done, then this next part's going to be cake work for you. Basically, get that rib fence into the original starting position, and we're going to get our guide fence installed. Now, our guide fence is going to be 3¼ inches away from the bottom part of our rib fence here, so that you can put a whole 2x4 in there. And the whole purpose of the guide fence is so there's something to rest that other part of your shoe on when you're running your circular saw down here. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you definitely want to make sure that you can fit the 2x4 in there nice and parallel to the rib fence. So you might even want to throw a 2x4 in there while you're working on installing the guide fence, just to verify that it is going to fit there in case there's any difference in the 2x4s you're using. All right, we're going to cut the pieces for the end unit and our general clamp right on our jig. You can see here our end unit has a couple pieces that are 3/8 inches thick and a piece that's 3/4 inch thick. Now we're going to actually use our jig here to build these. The first piece coming off our jig is going to be the 3/4 inch thick, and that's going to be for our general clamp. So we're going to go ahead and cut that one and set it aside. Now the next two pieces coming off are going to be for our end unit. They're both 3/8 inches wide. They're both 15 and 9/16 inches long, and then once you cut the first one, that's done. Now the next one, we have to get that down to 9/16. So we're going to go ahead and screw that into our frame jig here, just over, so that we get a 9/16 inch piece from our circular saw. Now we're on to the end unit assembly. This crazy thing allows you to get those tapered edges on your frames. What I've done here is basically taken a spacer and put it here, and this is a 9/16 inch spacer. Get it away from the rib fence, 9/16 of an inch. I used another piece of stock on this side just to hold the frame in place and also to hold our clamp in place when we get to that. Then you want a 3.5 inch plywood holding those together, and on top of that, just a stop block to keep the material from going out and get it in the same place every time. Once you have those pieces built, then you can go ahead and put on the clamp. The way we're building this clamp is just a 1 foot 3/4 inch piece of plywood. It's got a hole in the center of it that goes down through the 1.5 inch piece of stock underneath, and this will secure your work while you're cutting. Now the main thing is the saw is going to come over 3/4 of an inch plus 1/8 of an inch, so that's 7/8. So you want to make sure that this is more than 7/8 of an inch away from the rib fence. That way you won't be cutting it every time. I guess you only cut it once and then it'll be cut, but just to be on the safe side, there are staples underneath this, so make sure you have a clearance of 7/8 inch or more so that your saw blade doesn't cut your clamp. Once you have that done, you actually have part done for the next piece, because we can reuse this clamp here. This clamp is exactly the same for the general clamp, which we're going to build next. And the beauty of this is I just found some, I was having some trouble figuring out how to do this, and my wife had this rubber counter stuff. It's kind of grippy, and I just took a 1 inch by 1 foot piece of this. I stapled it, folded it in half, and stapled it again, and this works as an awesome clamp. It's kind of squishy, and it holds the wood perfectly because of the grippy surface on it. I have used this before for some tricks with router and holding pieces while you're routering them, but so I had an idea that this would work, and it just works perfect. So if anything, you can use this on any project you're working on. Definitely worth having some of this counter paper around. Oh yeah, one more secret about the end unit. When I was putting it together, I needed some type of spacer, and all I had was some cardboard laying around from an old nail box, and it worked perfect. It's about 1/16 of an inch thick. I just wanted it a little more than I just wanted to get this up a little more than 3/8 of an inch so that I could slide the piece of work in there, and I wasn't wedging it in every time. And that 1/16 of an inch cardboard on the nail box worked perfect. I cut it to 1.5 here, 9/16 inch here, and just made it as long as this top block, and that worked perfect for the spacer. The screws in here, I was saying earlier, these are the 2-inch drywall screws, the black ones, and these silver ones here are the number 8 by 1 inch screws, and those just so they don't go all the way through the end unit. All right, like we already talked, that end unit, we also got the clamp. This is just calling this the general clamp because this is going to clamp everything else that we need to clamp. This will be the clamp for the bottom bars. This is the clamp for the top bar. And basically the way this works, it goes on our jig here. It sits up against the guide fence. It's 7/8 or more from the rip fence, remember, because we don't want to cut it, and it'll hold that 1.5 inch stock down while we cut the bottom bar off and while we cut the groove for our top bars. All right, we're almost done. This is the last piece here. This is the tenon guide. I'm calling it the tenon guide because, you know, when you make mortise and tenons, they fit in like that. Well, the tenon is the piece that has a cut on either side, basically like a rabbet on either side of it. And that's what we're doing here. So what you need is 2 pieces of plywood, 3/4 inches thick, and you're gonna make them about 5.5 inches long. Screw them together. We're going to screw them to here. This is super important when you're putting it into the base here. You want to countersink these at least 1/4 inch so you don't hit them with your saw. The saw does pass near these holes, and you want to make sure those screws aren't deep enough so you're not going to hit it with your circular saw blade. That is no. We're almost done. We just got to build the tenon guide and put the hole in the base here. As you can see, the hole here is 1.5 inches long. It's 13/16 inches wide, and the key measurement here is going to be 7/16 away from the rip fence. 7/16 away from the rip fence, so that when we remove the material from the top bar, it's exactly where we want it. Now, you can build this whole jig with a circular saw. You can make this hole with a chisel and drill. I've done it. It's not fun. I recommend that if you know somebody that has some type of coping saw or a skill saw, jigsaw, something you can get in there, it will be your friend, because chiseling plywood is not fun. But I made sure you could do it. Once you have the hole cut for the tenon guide, we're going to go ahead and put the tenon guide braces on. This is what you're going to clamp your wood to while you're sawing it, and once you have that done, we are done. So there it is, guys. I hope you liked this build. It was definitely something. I spent weeks on this. I loved it. It was super fun. I didn't know if I could do it or not, but I'm glad I got it done. And the manual, if you're serious about building this though, guys, save yourself some time. I detailed that manual and it is great. All right, guys, thanks for watching. If you made it all the way through the DIY woodworking jig here, I appreciate it. I hope this helps you with your how to build your beehives and how to build your bee frames. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. I appreciate it. It helps get the word out. And tell me what you're working on. Are you working on something now? Why don't you shoot me down in the comments, and I'd like to see what everybody's working on out there. And also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. The next couple videos I put out, we're going to get into some honey. I know you guys are loving the honey out there from the bees, and I've done some interesting things, so I want to show you what I've been up to with the honey. I'm B-Boy Bill, and thanks for watching.